Hey everybody, Seth Apter here, coming to you live from my studio in New York City. It's a good day. Why is it a good day? Because, drumroll please, it is a release day. I have stencils for you. I don't know if you all know it, but I design with lots of companies, but the first company I ever designed for was StencilGirl products. That was back in, I don't know, 2013 maybe. And I will tell you that I am still designing with them, and I have 4 new stencils for you. These are available in my online shop at sethapter.com. They're available at the StencilGirl website, and they are also available in shops who have chosen to stock them throughout the world. I'm going to keep all this information and write it down right below in the YouTube description box. So you can click right over. I'm making it easy. But enough of this. Let's shift to this so you can actually see what I am talking about. Okay, so 4 new stencils. I'm going to first, 1, show you each stencil. 2, I'm going to show you some art that I created with each stencil. 3, because I like to count with my fingers, I am then going to do a little bit of what I call stencil swatching. And who doesn't like a swatch? Really, I mean, raise your hand if you don't like a swatch. So let's go through and show you. I have 4 stencils. They are the 3rd release in a collection that I call the Matrix stencils. Basically because a matrix is sort of an ordered array of things, and it is also an incubator for ideas. So I like to think that maybe these stencils will give you ideas for your art. So this is the largest one. It is called Mishmash. And I have to tell you, I do love to name my stencils, all my products. This is Mishmash. It's 9 by 12, so it's a very large stencil. Loving this because if you're working large, you can use the entire stencil. If you're working larger, you can place the stencil side by side and repeat it. And if you're working small, you can choose any one of these segments so that every time you use it, you make something different. All right, so that is Mishmash. Let me show you Mishmash. This is Mishmash in a very simple sample that basically shows you exactly what it looks like if you use every element. Because most of the time I don't. I use pieces, bits and pieces. That is Mishmash. And this is Mishmash Seth Apter way, where you can barely tell that Mishmash is here. But that is what I often use my stencils for. I create backgrounds, and I like to get it lost in the layers. I think it's pretty obvious when you see the stencil right there where the mishmash is, but I like to call it mishmash because basically that's what it is. It's a hot mess, mishmash, mashup of layers, which is pretty much the definition of mixed media. So remember, be open, explore, and transform now. And let me mention that if you like these words and some of these other details here, these are all created with different stencils from my StencilGirl products collection. All right, I give you Mishmash. I also have 2 stencils that are 6 by 6. The first one is called Hopscotch. Now, this is definitely a Seth Apter design. Why? Well, you all know by now. But first of all, there's some linearity in here. Hello. It's kind of like my middle name, Seth Linear Matte, as in matte, not shiny, Apter. But it's broken up a bit. So if you look at the details of each of these rectangles or squares, you know, they're uneven. They're a little curvy. I love that contrast. And they have drips. I do love a drip. Got some extra spots here. This can be used as it is, but I really am thinking that people might use it their own way. So how cool would it be just to have that right there as a border, or that? Or you can use these single elements randomly around the page. I have to say, that one there with that little kind of cross, maybe that one with the dot, those are my 2 favorites. I said that too loud. They're all going to hear me, but I like this stencil. What does it look like when you just stencil it out in full? It looks like that. It's kind of not surprising. It sort of looks like that. But again, that's not necessarily how it's meant to be used. And one of the things I like when I work with any product, whether it's my own or another designer's, is to make it my own. I don't want someone to look at a piece of art I make and say, oh, I have that stencil too. I want them just to see art. So I decided to create a piece of art as a sample that actually included every element here as is, but did so in a way that it's kind of lost. And maybe even now you won't even be able to see the stencil. But that's it. And, you know, I think it came out pretty well considering that I was trying to hide it. Obviously, it's there. You can kind of see it. But, you know, it's not the first thing that screams out that this is the Hopscotch stencil. So this is Zigzag. I created this one with the purposes of versatility. Well, pretty much I create every one of my products so they're versatile. You know, they're all abstract and they can be used by 10 different artists, 10 different ways. And I built this one so that you can build a surface design or a pattern. This is also Zigzag. I think it looks like Zigzag. No secrets here. I wanted to go with the sense of a triangle or a diamond just to shift things a little bit, although there's still a lot of linearity and circles there. And then when you use it kind of in the background, you get this piece, which is, you know, mixed media collage. And you can kind of see where Zigzag is. This was not used like this, where I laid it out and just did it all. I created all these different elements on different pieces of paper and then tore them up and then almost put it back together like a puzzle. You know, it doesn't match perfectly, which I did not want it to. But that is Hopscotch. And this one is called Surplus. And these are pluses and crosses and squares. And I thought that this is fun because of the fact that there's some differences in scale, because you can use them all, or literally on a huge piece of art, you can just choose to take that one and use that one separately. This is really meant to help you add small details to your background, different ones at different times in different places. And I think despite the fact that it's small, it can have a big impact on your work. So what does that look like when it's stenciled? Well, it looks like surplus. 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 No surprises there. And here it is on a piece of art, which actually, even though I just said my middle name was Matt, does have some shine. Again, I love contrast, so having this very flat matte background, which was made with my paper artsy fresco finished chalk acrylics, and then having that shine, which was created using pet tape, it gives you a nice contrast. And this, again, was not just laid out and stenciled. It was moved around, and different elements were used in different places to create a full-on background. Again, the notion behind all of these 4 stencils is that they're versatile so that you can use them for large surfaces or small surfaces. You either grow them by stenciling them more than once or shrink them by stenciling sections. So again, we have our 9x12 mishmash. We have our 6x6 hopscotch. We have our 6x6 zigzag. And we have our 4x4 surplus. These are available at SethApter.com, also at StencilGirl, their website, StencilGirl products, and in select stores worldwide. You've seen the stencils. Now let's do some swatching. I do this with any new stencil that I have. It's just my typical way of using it. And I do it either on what I'm using right here, which is a heavyweight watercolor paper, so that this will ultimately become a substrate for building a piece of art, or I do it on a very thin sheet, like a printer paper or tissue paper or deli paper, so that it can become torn up for collage. But I am going to use the heavyweight watercolor paper because it'll just be very clear what I'm doing on screen. So I'm going to get my first stencil. This is the large one, Mish Mash, and I'm going to use my dye sprays for this. And basically, this is what I do. I'm testing it out. I want to see what it looks like. So I'm going to do this two ways. So the first way is I'm just going to get a whole bunch of different dye sprays, and I'm going to just spray. I mean, couldn't be easier. And just as an FYI, if you don't know these sprays, they're my line of dye sprays. All these colors are matte. They dry fast. They're dye-based ink, so they're not permanent. And colors, in case you want to reference them, underwater, sunflower, honey, sea spray, rusty saffron, morning mist, and cassis. And this is how I use them for a lot of my work. It's a way to get some interesting effects. So I'm just going to choose one. I'm going to hold it pretty high up. I'm not going to hold it too close because that would flood it, which I love, but maybe not for my first swatching. And I'm just going to spritz through in a few places like that. You don't need to switch heavy. So starting with cassis, I'm going to move to, let's go with sunflower. These colors are going to blend and mix because they're still wet. I'm not letting the layers dry, and they're not permanent. So as long as they're wet, they are going to do some blending. How about if we throw in some honey? I hope you can see that I'm not overly planning this. Let's bring in some sea spray. A lot of the colors I have here are warm tones, and I'm bringing in that contrast by bringing in a blue, which is a cool tone. Just so you sort of know where my sense of which colors I'm choosing, where it comes from. Now that blue is going to blend a little bit with the yellow, and it's going to give us some green. Can you see some green there? So let's just own that. Use underwater. Whoop. Well, that was a little flood. And add some green directly. Going over the colors I've already gone over. And I don't know, how about if we just throw in some rusty saffron because it has the word rust in it, and who doesn't like rust? I mean, probably some car mechanics don't, or car owners, but who are we kidding? We love rust. By the by, you're going to mix this red and this blue. You're going to kind of get some purple, which could be kind of interesting too. So let's enhance that right there. Could this be any more simple? I'm just going to lift it, and we're going to see what the stencil looks like. And it looks like that. Now, I don't know, whenever I see embossing powder melt, especially metallic embossing powder, it's forever an ooh and an ah for me. And honestly, I have to say that when I use these sprays and I use them in multiple colors, I get an ooh and an ah. You can clearly see there's some areas where it's stronger than other areas, and some areas where it's lighter. I'm okay with that. I mean, I actually really like that. I also happen to like that I got a little border because I cut this paper a little bit wider than the actual stencil, and that's actually a hint. If I had planned this, I could, for example, cut the piece of paper 1 inch wider on all four sides, sprayed around it, and I would have a gorgeous 1 inch blended border from the dye sprays. So that's a little extra tip. Anytime I can do one thing and get two effects, I'm happy about that. Did you see that? 1, 2. All right, so I'm just going to put this aside, and I'm going to do what is, oh, they're all my favorite things. I can't really say it's my favorite, but I'm going to not waste an ounce of all this spray. It's going to stay wet for a while because the stencil is Mylar, so it doesn't absorb the spray. And I'm just going to turn it over, and I'm going to carefully place it straight down there. It's a twofer. And what did I say? I love it when you can do it once and get something that's second element out of it. And I'm going to go over this with a brayer. Because I have this on watercolor paper, which is quite absorbent, it should absorb quite well. I am being pretty careful not to use the brayer too vigorously, because what can happen is the brayer might stick to some excess spray dye and move the stencil. And I really, as much as I like a mess, for the swatching portion of this, I just want to keep it pretty consistent with the design. So now let's flip. We got the reveal. I love a reveal within a reveal. So I'm going to just lift that up, and I'm going to get that. Oh man. I mean, that is an ooh and an ah, and maybe even more of an ooh and an ah than this. So what you basically have is you have the stencil used as a stencil. You have the stencil in some ways used as a mask. You know, it's the inner and the outer, the inner and the outer. Now, what is really cool about this, well, it's all pretty cool, right? I also, by the by, love this design because, you know, part of me thinks it looks sort of like a Moroccan tile. Part of me thinks it looks like the view of maybe New York City from above, or the view of even some farmland as you're flying over it in central part of the States. It can be seen as a great, great G-R-E-A-T, but I mean a G-R-A-T-E. I think it could lend itself to a lot. But what you can do, because what is this? It's a stencil. So just like soap is self-cleaning, a stencil is self-stenciling. So I am praying, because I'm doing this in front of all you, that I can then just replace the stencil over the bit of stencil that I've already stenciled. And now I can do whatever. I can use more dye sprays and spray. I can use ink. I can use paint. I can go back in. And I'm really excited about that notion. And I don't think everyone always thinks about that, but it's such a simple thing to do. So I think I'm going to go in and I'm going to just brighten our days. We all need brighter days. I'm going to go in with sunflower, and I'm going to mostly, not completely, but mostly exclusively just spray the sunflower so that the areas that are white in the stencil are now not white. You see what I'm doing, people? I'm building layers. Nothing like building layers. Maybe I'd go in with a color that I didn't use at all. A little bit of the Morning Mist. That's the one color I didn't use. Just to spritz a little bit of that, just to get a little bit of altering effect. I don't want it just perfectly even and smooth. And let's just go in with a touch of honey. Now I can go as heavy or as light as I want. I could have left a good amount of white. I could have left no white. But let's just flip the stencil and see. I need a drum roll. Somebody please give me the drum roll. And now I've done that. And I have begun to build layers so simply. And I just really want you to notice that with just the two layers, doesn't it seem so dimensional? I mean, it really, 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 really seems dimensional. Now, what about this? This could go on. This could be the longest demo we've ever done, because I could now go back here. Yes, I said it, folks, and turn this over and remove that white. So let's flip. Now it's really wet. I'm not putting it down dry, so I need to be a little bit cautious about placement. And I want you to notice that if I move it a certain way, like just a little bit over, I can get a shadow effect. But I'm going to just lay it down where it landed. I'm going to hope for a little bit of a shadow effect. And if you don't know what I mean by shadow effect, I mean, do you see that white that's around every single element that I had stenciled before? Because I shifted this overall stencil so it's not perfectly aligned. Do you see that white that's at the bottom? That's going to give some more depth because some of the white is going to show up like a shadow. I'm so excited to see this. So we're going to have another reveal. Drum roll. I don't know. This is like the 10th reveal. All right, and we got that. Ooh, I'm going to put this aside. It's still a little wet, but look at that. Oh man, look at the depth you get because I shifted the stencil just a bit. It really looks 3D to me. You can make that shadow effect even stronger depending upon how you move it. Oh yeah, I am really, really happy with this. Now, do I have any wet left? Honestly, I've sort of lost track of which side is wet, but I got this beautiful space right here. Maybe if I had my journal out, I would do this in my journal. Let's just use every bit. Every bit. All right, that's swatching. That's swatching through my larger stencil, Mishmash. Let's go to the second stencil. This one is Hopscotch. I'm going to use that just so you see it better. And I'm going to get another piece of heavyweight watercolor paper. I sized it to be 7 inches by 7 inches. The stencil itself is 6 by 6. And I'm going to do it a little differently. I'm just going to go ahead and use some ink pads. Now, these ink pads, what are these little special, incredible baby ink pads? These are from Seth Apter, and also so simple. I'm going to get a sponge. It's not a craft sponge. It's a smooth sponge, but it's a makeup sponge. And I'm just going to do the same thing I just did with the dye sprays, you know, to create this sense of depth and multicolor, because it looks so complicated, but it's so easy with a bunch of different ink pads. These are hybrid ink pads. They are oil-based. They stay wet for a long time in the pad. They dry pretty quickly on the surface, but they don't dry out. I've had these a long time. Some of these are new colors, but I've had a lot for a long time. And also, they are permanent. And I'm just going to go in. And I'm going to just kind of do what I did with the dye sprays. And I am going to just pick and choose some colors. I want you to note that I am using different segments of the sponge, just so it doesn't mix too heavily back onto the ink pad. You're going to see that these are somewhat translucent. So because they're translucent, you are going to absolutely get some color effects and color mixing. I'm going to use a different sponge. And the way I'm going to use a different sponge is I'm just going to, this is a big hint, my friends. You don't need to get rid of this sponge. It might not be fully even, but I'm just going to snip the top off so that when I use it, it doesn't contaminate. All right, so now what I'm going to do, I'm going to just show you a little peek. Cool, right? Oh, so cool. But I'm going to go with that notion of creating the depth 3D shadow, and I'm going to move the stencil so that there's more white showing. So, you know, you can move it in one or two directions. You can move it up, you can move it down, you can move it left, you can move it right, but you can also move it down and to the left, down and to the right. So I'm going to just move it, let's match it up, down. So you see all the white at the base, and then to the left. So I am creating a shadow as if there was a light source. Those of you who draw understand that there's going to be light coming from here. So I'm making as if there's a shadow that's going to come down that way. And I'm going to use the lightest color I have. You don't have to, but it makes sense, because if I use a dark color, I'm going to color all the other lighter colors that are there. And this time I am going to get a fresh sponge because I really want this to work. And I'm going to hold down my stencil. I'm really holding my stencil down because this is really sticky now. My stencil is sticky because of this ink, and it will be easy, you will see, if you do it without holding it down, for all of a sudden, every time you put your sponge down, it would absolutely lift your stencil and move it. Can I highlight as well that for those of you who like this kind of stenciling technique, I have an online class that's housed on YouTube. It's from a year-long series where each of the classes, there are 12, focus on one aspect of mixed media art. And it is a stenciling class. It's all about these kinds of techniques. So if this interests you, if this seems new to you, you may want to check that out. It's called Mixed Media Mechanics Stencils, and I'm going to put the link down under for you to check out later. But let's have the reveal now. I mean, it's just cool like that, right? But let's have the reveal now. And oh, I love it. Do you see the sense of sort of movement and shadow you get? Sometimes when you do it, it almost feels like there's movement, literal movement. Like it might even make you dizzy depending upon the patterns you choose, the colors you choose. But I just love the depth. And I want to highlight that I can highlight the highlights. And I'm not going to do it because it would take too long. But you would just get a pencil and you would go over. I'm using a Stabilo All. It's a nice soft pencil. And you would go over all those areas, the left bottom of every block. Again, this is all discussed in the Mixed Media Mechanics Stencil class, where you can even get more, I'm going to show you, more depth and shadow. I mean, seriously, if we had days, we could just take this to a whole nother level. But we don't. Now I'm going to swatch Zigzag. And really what I want to show you with Zigzag is something very specific. So this is a little less about a swatching and a little bit more about the nature of the stencil. So let's just say I place it right there. And we're going to make this relatively, I don't know if I can control myself to really make it, it's simple, because you know I'm all about the layers, but I'm going to use again this ink. It's a permanent ink from Shashihata. And I'm going in with this kind of purplish, eggplanty, plummy color. So let's just now show you what that looks like. Even in one color, I don't know, I kind of think it's an ooh and an ah. But this was designed so that you can build a full-on surface, because you can just line up and match up the edges, and then you can, they don't all work, you have to find the ones that do work, and you can then build out to create further definition. So let's go simple. You know, this is all about scale in a way. It allows you to use the single stencil, which is only 6 by 6 inches, in a way that will enable you to cover the surface that, you know, if it's a 1 inch by 1 inch surface, just use one of these little elements. If it's a 6 foot by 6 foot surface, just put it on loop, put it on repeat. Play your favorite song over and over again while you use the stencil over and over again, side by side. And it fits together in many permutations. It's not just this one. And you just need to, a little bit like a puzzle, figure out which ones you want to use. So that I do that, I'm just filling up the space. I'm just filling up the space. Who doesn't like to fill up the space? Now, do you see, let's see, let's go down here. Oh, let's remember, you can also turn the stencil upside down. Oh, it is a little bit off camera. Sorry about that, guys. I could turn the stencil upside down and I get, in a manner of speaking, a different stencil. I get a different orientation, which again allows me to be able to seamlessly create this larger surface. So you see, it's just this continuous element. Now, I could continue. Remember, you can put the stencil in all different ways. It doesn't have to even be that way or that way. But I'm not going to, because you get the idea. And I just love the look of this. This also has this just wonderful feel for me. It's linear, but it's got some soft lines and it's got those spots. And you can just create something that really is dynamic. And all these little areas, well, they're just asking to be filled in. You know, I'm dying to take out some colored pencils and maybe fill in these segments, or a little watercolor paint, or my dye sprays. I love to take a brush into my dye sprays and paint with them like they're watercolors. All right, got one more for you to swatch. That's the baby of the bunch. And this one is Surplus. And again, Surplus was designed to give you some maximum versatility. The way I saw Surplus in my head, doesn't mean anything about the way you're going to use it, is this notion that I can go in, let's go in initially with just an ink pad. Just an ink pad. You know, ink pads have to be one of the most amazing inventions there is. There is and are. I'm going to pick and choose which one I'm using and what colors I am creating with them. And remember, I don't even have to use them all. I could use just one of them for a detail in a background. All right, so I have that. I could continue that. I could move the stencil. So why does it have to sit there? I could absolutely just, let's say I want to, let's kind of make a little bit of a drift downward. Let's always remember that it's nice when you come off the edge. Let's do some purple up here. So I've taken this symbol and I've brought it so it comes off the edge. And it just feels like it drifts downward. I would definitely fill this in more, but this would be a nice way to use the stencil uniquely. So I want to thank you guys. So this has been my swatching demo for my new stencils from StencilGirl products. There are 4 new stencils. They're in the Matrix line. So they go with many of the stencils that I've released before. They're available now worldwide from SethApter.com in the United States and Canada. From StencilGirl products, their website. They're the developers of the stencil. They ship everywhere, and they're also in shops throughout the world. I really want to thank you for being here. I hope you got maybe some surprises out of these swatching demos, and maybe there's something that you haven't done in a while and this reminded you, or maybe there's something that I did that you've never done before and you're going to try. Either way, if you're using my stencil, please tag me because I want to see the magic that you create. Thank you so much for being here. Bye now.